Jill's world shattered in an instant. Her entire life, perfected for years, carefully crafted to look flawless, was about to crumble in front of her. In an instant, she went from the grieving widow to the prime suspect. She was sitting in the police interrogation room, her hands trembling as she clutched the cold metal chair. For the first time in her life, Jill felt powerless. But she couldn't let them see that. She couldn't let them see the cracks in her facade. Her thoughts raced. She had worked so hard for this life, this perfect life, that was now unraveling. What would the neighbors think? What about the PTA moms? All her friends who looked up to her? It would all be gone. The illusion she had worked tirelessly to create. Detective Harris entered the room, his footsteps echoing off the cold walls. Jill tried to compose herself, pushing all her emotions into a tight knot in her stomach. She knew what this was. She could feel it in her bones. They were getting closer to the truth. She could see it in their eyes, in the way they spoke to her. They knew. But Jill couldn't let them win. She couldn't let them take away everything she had. Before we dive into the story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping tale. And if you're as intrigued by this twisted tale as I am, drop a comment below. What do you think would drive a mother to commit such an unimaginable act? She glanced at the detective, and for a moment, her eyes hardened. Her grip on the chair tightened. There was no way she was going down for this, not after everything she had sacrificed. The detective took his seat across from her. His expression was unreadable, but there was a sharpness in his gaze. He had seen the signs. He had seen people like her before. People who thought they could manipulate their way out of anything, who believed they were invincible. "You're very calm, Mrs. Miller," Detective Harris said, his voice steady but not without an edge. Jill forced a smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "I'm just trying to process everything. It's a lot." "Understandable," he replied, his tone neutral. "But you're aware that we've found some inconsistencies in your statements, right?" Jill's heart raced, but she quickly masked it with a blank stare. "I've already told you everything I know. I don't see why we're still having this conversation." Harris leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the table. "You told us you were at the grocery store when your husband and children died, but we've confirmed you weren't there. Your car was parked in the driveway, and we have security footage showing you entering the house before the incident." Jill's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not true. I was at the store. I didn't." "We've also found traces of poison in your husband's bloodstream," Harris interrupted. "You were seen in the kitchen earlier that day. So, we're trying to understand how your family ended up dead in their own home." Jill's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let the detective see it. She could feel the walls closing in, but she wouldn't let him break her. She was smarter than this. She had controlled everything for years, and she wasn't about to let it all fall apart now. Detective Harris's voice grew colder. "Mrs. Miller, you're not as convincing as you think. You were involved in your family's deaths, and we're going to prove it." Jill's mind raced. She had planned this, everything. She knew what it would take to keep up the act. The perfect grieving wife, the woman who was too devastated to speak, too broken to even function. But now, with the evidence mounting, Her perfect little world was slipping away. She had to act fast. "What are you implying?" Jill's voice shook slightly, but she quickly regained her composure. "Are you accusing me of murder? That's insane. I loved my family. I would never—" "We know what you are, Mrs. Miller," Harris said, cutting her off. "We've been looking into your past. We know about your manipulations, your need to control every single aspect of your life. You didn't just lose your family. You took them away because you couldn't stand the thought of losing control." Jill's pulse thudded in her ears, but she kept her face a mask of innocence. She had always been able to charm her way out of things. She could talk her way through anything. But this was different. The weight of the situation was suffocating. She leaned back in her chair, trying to breathe evenly. "This is ridiculous. You don't know anything about me. You don't understand what I've been through." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Miller," Harris said, his voice unwavering. "You've spent your whole life building a perfect image, perfect marriage, perfect family. But underneath all that, there's nothing but emptiness. And when your world started to crumble, you did what any narcissist would do. You destroyed it all to protect your image." Jill's eyes burned with fury. He had no idea what she had endured, no idea what she had sacrificed. She had spent her entire life making sure everyone saw her as perfect. Perfect mother, perfect wife. But now, everything was slipping through her fingers. She was losing control. Her breathing became shallow as panic set in. She knew she was running out of time. She needed a way out, a way to turn this around. But there was no escape. The detective had all the pieces. She was trapped. Jill's mind raced, her thoughts spiraling into a chaotic whirlwind. How had it come to this? She had planned everything so meticulously, so perfectly. The deaths, the cover-up, the alibi. It had all seemed foolproof. But now, it felt like everything was collapsing at once. Her thoughts turned to her family, the people she had once controlled so easily. The truth hit her like a wave. They were all gone. Her husband, the man who had been her puppet for years, no longer had a say in her life. The children, who had been nothing more than pawns in her perfect little game, were dead. It was supposed to be an accident. A terrible, tragic accident that would rid her of the people who had begun to suffocate her image of perfection. Are you still following the story? This is just getting intense. If you're invested in Jill's downfall, take a moment to like this video. It helps our community grow and brings more content like this your way. And don't forget to share your thoughts. What's the real reason behind Jill's actions? Let's talk about it in the comments. She had done what was necessary, or so she had thought. Detective Harris's words echoed in her mind. Narcissist, control, manipulation. Each one felt like a dagger. He was right. She couldn't deny it any longer. Jill had destroyed her family, not because of the supposed love she had for them, but because they had become obstacles to her perfect life. She needed them gone. She needed them out of the way so she could continue living in the illusion she had created. But now, it was all falling apart. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I didn't do this. I loved them. I loved my family. Why would I do something like that? Harris gave her a cold look, his eyes unblinking. Because you couldn't stand to let go. You couldn't stand the thought of being imperfect, Mrs. Miller, and when things started to crumble, you took the easy way out. You killed them. No, Jill exclaimed, her voice rising, desperate to be heard. I didn't kill anyone. I would never. You have no idea what it was like living in that house, in that marriage. You don't understand. I understand more than you think, Harris interrupted. We've spoken to people who knew your family. They all paint a picture of a woman who would do anything to keep up appearances. Your marriage was falling apart. Your children were rebelling against you, and you couldn't take it. Jill's breath hitched in her throat. You're wrong. They were my family. I did everything for them. Did you? Harris leaned in closer. Or did you do everything for yourself? You don't care about anyone but yourself, Mrs. Miller. You're a narcissist, and in the end, you didn't just lose them. You destroyed them. And now there's nothing left for you. No perfect family, no perfect life. Just the wreckage you left behind. Jill felt her chest tighten, her breaths shallow. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to make him understand that he was wrong, that this wasn't who she was. But deep down, she knew the truth. The perfect life she had so carefully crafted was a lie. She had to make him see it. I didn't mean to. She started, but Harris cut her off again. You didn't mean to, he scoffed. You planned it all. The poison, the alibi. You thought you could get away with it. But we caught you, Mrs. Miller. You're not as clever as you think you are. Jill's hands clenched into fists. She had always been the one in control, the one who pulled the strings. How had this happened? How had everything slipped away from her so quickly? She wasn't just losing control of the investigation. She was losing control of herself. I didn't kill them, Jill repeated, her voice low and shaky. You're wrong. Harris stood up, the chair scraping across the floor. The evidence says otherwise, and we'll find more. It's only a matter of time. Jill's heart pounded in her chest. She needed to think, to find a way out, but she was too far in. There was no way back. No escaping the truth. As Harris walked out of the room, leaving her alone, Jill sat there in silence. Her hands trembled in her lap as she stared at the floor, her thoughts swirling. She had built a life of perfection, a life that now seemed so far out of reach. Her husband, Mark, had always been the weak one. He had never stood up to her, never challenged her. He had been her support, her constant until he wasn't. And her children? They had been so easy to control, always obedient, always looking to her for approval. But things had begun to change. They had started questioning her, pushing back. They had begun to see the cracks in her perfect image. And that couldn't happen. It just couldn't. Jill had been losing control for months, but the final straw had come when Mark started to threaten divorce. The thought of losing him, of being exposed as a fraud, had terrified her. And the kids? They had started to act out. They didn't respect her. They didn't fear her. They were making it impossible for her to maintain the image she had so carefully curated. She couldn't have that. Not now. And so, Jill had made a choice. She had made the choice to take them out of the equation. Poison was quick, efficient, and clean. It wouldn't be traced right away. It would look like an accident. No one would suspect a thing. But now, as the walls closed in on her, Jill realized just how wrong she'd been. She thought she could get away with it. She thought she could control everything. But control had always been an illusion. And now, the illusion was shattered. Jill sat in the cold, dimly lit cell, the walls pressing in on her as she stared blankly ahead. The reality of what had happened, what she had done, slowly began to settle like a heavy stone in her chest. The truth was inescapable now. She could feel the weight of the words Detective Harris had said, each one echoing in her mind. You destroyed them. Her heart pounded in her chest as memories of the past few weeks flashed through her mind. Her husband's growing distance, her children's defiance, the way they had started questioning her, challenging her, refusing to live up to her perfect vision. The mask she had so carefully crafted had started to crack, and she couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. But now, as she sat in this cell, alone and powerless, Jill realized that it didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore. The perfect family, the perfect image, it was all gone. She had sacrificed them for nothing, for an illusion. She thought about her children, those innocent faces that had once looked up to her with love and trust. The same faces she had spent years shaping, molding, pushing them to fit her idea of perfection. She had controlled every aspect of their lives, what they wore, what they said, where they went. And when they began to slip from her grasp, she couldn't accept it. She couldn't let them ruin everything she had worked so hard to build. Her thoughts turned to Mark, her husband, the man who had once been her ally, her partner in this elaborate game of appearances. He had been weak. He had started questioning her control, questioning their life, questioning everything. And when he threatened to leave her to expose her for who she truly was, she had seen him as a threat to her perfect world. And so, she had removed him, just like that. The poison had been so easy to administer, so quick, so clean. She had convinced herself it was for the best. But now, as she sat in this dark cell, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. Had it been worth destroying the very people she had once loved? Had it been worth the lie, the manipulation, the violence? The walls seemed to close in around her as the silence settled. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of inevitability. She was alone. Her family was gone, and she had no one left to control, no one left to feed her ego. The image she had so desperately clung to had vanished, and with it, everything she had built. Jill's hands trembled as she wiped away the tears that had begun to spill down her face. For the first time in her life, she wasn't in control, and that terrified her more than anything else. She had spent so long living in a world of lies, convincing herself that she was invincible, that she could control everything. But the truth was simple. She had never been in control. It had all been a lie. And now that lie had destroyed everything. Her mind raced, and for a fleeting moment, she considered escape, running, disappearing, vanishing from the world she had so carefully crafted. But deep down, Jill knew there was no escaping this. There was no way out. The police had everything. The evidence was undeniable. She had made sure of it. The walls had closed in, and she had no choice but to face the consequences. Jill thought of the woman she had once been. She had been so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to manipulate those around her, to bend them to her will. She had prided herself on her perfection. But perfection had a price, and that price had been her family. Her hands gripped the edge of the metal bed in her cell as she finally allowed herself to break down. The sobs came, uncontrollable, racking her body. For the first time, she felt the crushing weight of her actions. For the first time, she understood the devastation she had caused. Her family, her husband, her children, they were gone. And she had taken them from the world, all for the sake of a perfect image that never existed. As the tears flowed, Jill's mind wandered to the future. What would become of her now? The police would charge her. The trial would come. And when it was over, she would spend the rest of her life in prison. Her world, once so grand and perfect, would be nothing but a memory. She would be a prisoner, both in the physical sense and in the prison of her own mind. The image of her family, her husband and children, haunted her every thought. The faces of the people she had destroyed would be with her forever, and she could never escape that. No matter where she went, no matter what happened next, she would never escape the truth. Jill had made a choice, and now, as the reality of that choice settled over her, she realized she had lost everything. The perfect life she had fought so hard to build was gone. She had destroyed it all. As the cell door clanged open, signaling the end of her solitude, Jill wiped away the last of her tears. She was no longer the woman who had once ruled her world with an iron fist. She was broken, defeated, and the only thing left to do now was face the consequences of her actions. If you were captivated by this dark and emotional story, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this cautionary tale. We've got more true crime, mystery, and psychological thrillers coming your way. And if you have your own theories or questions about Jill's story, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. But even then, Jill could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on her. She had thought she could control everything. But in the end, she had learned the hardest lesson of all. Control was an illusion. And now, it had cost her everything.